We're here with Michael Connelly and Margarita Leviva. I know that you've seen this film before, but it's one of those things that stays with you. And you're right, Michael, the music at the end is wonderful.
Yeah, it had great music all through it.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the things that held it together.
Let's start with the film. You wrote the original novel. Tell us a little about the adaptation. You were reported to have been, before I do, I want to say something about both Michael and Margarita. The first of which is that, I'm a big supporter of both of their careers. Michael, I've known for a few years, and it's important to also know that he, is a really lovely man, incredibly talented. He also, like me, went to University of Florida. So we support each other. And that's why he's here, among other reasons. And Margarita Leviva, I hope she won't be embarrassed to hear this story, maybe for the first time she's heard it for a while. A number of years ago, this says a lot about this young actress. A number of years ago, I did an event at the 92nd Street Y, right here, and it was about the reunion of those people who fought to free Soviet Jewry throughout the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And it was really an all-star group. It was Elie Wiesel, it was Natan Sharansky, who was imprisoned in a Soviet prison for a number of years and was very much the face of the freeing Soviet Jewry movement, and Richard Pearl, who was then working for the Bush White House, but he, at a younger stage, was working with Scoop Jackson, another former senator, United States senator, very much involved in this movement. And I wanted someone else. I wanted someone younger who was the beneficiary of the freeing the Soviet Jewry movement. And I contacted Margarita Leviva, who was even a younger actress at that time. And not a second thought, she just said, yes, I want to do this. And my first thought was, with those men on stage, I said, either that took balls, or for this theater, chutzpah, that she would think that she should be. No, she didn't. Unfortunately, she went off to start filming Revenge, which we're going to start talking about today. But anyway, and so we bring her back. And there's other reasons why she's here, in addition to playing Regina in the film. So let's talk about the adaptation, Michael. Were you pleased with the adaptation? And many people are always confused about these questions. I know that you said famously, if you take the money, it's their turn to tell the story, meaning that you don't really have that much of an expectation of having a role to play in advising them how the movie is done. But did they seek any of your advice?
They did it initially, and then I kind of invited myself out by the way I reacted to what they were doing at that time. The script went through many changes over 5 years. The one they actually shot was about the 15th draft. And they happily gave me the first draft about 5 years before, and I thought it was really bad. And I thought, and they had missed the mark in a lot of different ways. And I actually thought they wanted to hear what I thought, so I wrote a 9-page critique of the script.
A 9-page?
9-page.
Single space?
Yeah, single space, of course. And then I never heard back for 4 years. And then I was only invited back into it because they had cast Matthew McConaughey, and he said, this is based on a book, where's that guy? And I know that guy must have researched this book with some lawyers and so forth, and I want to meet those lawyers. Because I want to do this part right. And so because of him, I was brought back in, and that was when I read the 15th draft, and I loved that draft. I read it on a plane coming out to meet Matthew McConaughey, and got off that plane smiling because something had changed dramatically. Even though it was the same screenwriter, he kept plugging away. One of the producers had been a former trial lawyer, and he helped. And so in that 4 years, it became something I was really happy with.
Did what we see, I know you're overall happy, but in terms of the depictions of the various characters, like Regina, for instance, is there more to some of this, or is there another character that's not in here that we would have seen if this was not just a 2-hour movie? Are they developed in the way that you think is so faithful that you get a real sense of just proportion, how much Regina's character, Margarita's character was in the film?
Yeah, no, there's nothing really missing. It's a first-person novel, so Mickey tells the reader many different stories, many little anecdotes. This case, I had this case, right. The guy that's nothing more scary than an innocent man, that comes from another case. So But the script and the film really kind of cut through all that extra stuff to a through line of the main story. And I don't think there's anything missing from the Reggie Campo. She was great. It's very hard to do. You take a character who has a role in society that's really not appreciated or looked upon kindly, and she was able to swing sympathy towards that character. That was the key part of her in the book, and it came through in the movie.
Among the top-selling and most critically acclaimed of the legal thriller writers, and again, you're also very known for the Harry Bosch series, which is a really crime thriller. But if you looked at all of them, including Grisham and Scott Turow, you're the non-lawyer in the group.
Yeah.
And is that might be an advantage. You were reminding me that when you said that McConaughey brought you in. And I think you might have said backstage about something about when they first looked at your notes, they said something about you not being a lawyer.
Yeah, McConaughey knew I wasn't a lawyer, so he's smart enough to know I must have hung around with some lawyers, and he wanted to meet those lawyers, and that's why he reached out to me.
On the theory that if you were a lawyer, you wouldn't talk to a lawyer because you'd be one.
Yeah. So, and he has a connection to that. He's played lawyers. He wanted to be a lawyer before he got the acting bug, and so it was a.
And we're talking about A Time to Kill now is the one that people remember him for.
And so that was mostly the connection. As far as writing the book, I was a reporter for a long time, and I spent a lot of time in courtrooms, and I probably spent more time in courtrooms than a lot of lawyers, and so I kind of bring my experience. I don't have the degree, but I think I know a lot about how courtrooms work, and that's what I was trying to get into the book, and I think they did a good job of getting it into the film.
Margarita, you spent several years on this television show, Revenge, and people either have seen the show, she's wonderful in it, but if you've seen the show, you know that it's really, yet again, another adaptation of The Count of Monte Cristo. It's amazing how many, even law films, invoke The Count of Monte Cristo, that film that was based on the Nicholas Carcaterra novel, Sleepers, mentions it. It's in the Stephen King short story that the Shawshank Redemption, it's in there. It's in the movies, is it Z? Yeah, not Z. Is it Victory or V?
Okay.
Victory, V. It was another revenge film, and it's in there. And I guess this is interesting for you in particular, but Michael as well. You know, revenge films and revenge novels are really law films in a way, right? Because they're about the failure of law and the absolute moral madness that comes from not getting justice.
Right.
And do you think, do you think that was part of the appeal of the show? Do you think that that's one of the reasons that there's something inherent about revenge that is very human and basic and primal, but it's not that different from justice itself, that we want to make sure that those, look at the end of this movie, right? We have to know that Roulet gets what he deserves instead of what he said Regina did. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's something that as human beings, it's so innate in us. And I know as an audience member, I certainly enjoy watching someone going to get justice when justice isn't served by the law or by the people that are supposed to protect you. Someone taking their life into their own hands and saying, you know what, I'm going to right this. And
you mean right the wrong?
Right the wrong, yeah, that was done to me or that was done to my family or to my cause. And I certainly being a part of Revenge and rereading Count Monte Cristo and just it's definitely been a point of conversation with my family and my friends because I often question myself, like because being on the show, people have asked me, they're like, what do you think about revenge? Like, do you think it's right to get revenge, And
what do you think?
And it's something that I honestly, I battle with because my answer was always yes. I thought, if someone was wrong, do you want to go after the person that has wronged you and make it right? But without going into details, I had a personal thing happen to my family back in Russia where I ended up in a situation that was extraordinarily painful and hurtful to my family. And I thought for years I plotted, different ways
Strategies.
of getting revenge, and then in a way, I did end up, quote unquote, getting some sort of revenge. And the biggest feeling that I got from that was it wasn't satisfactory, and I actually felt bad for the people that sort of got what was coming to them.
Really?
You know what I mean? And so it really made me wonder about the whole idea of revenge, and and it's something that I think about a lot. I think the most provoking topics are the ones that you sort of battle the answer to, and so I feel like for myself I battle that sometimes.
Well, revenge films have been, in fact, among the biggest of Hollywood's gross films. It's funny, when you were mentioning, we had Mandy Patinkin as a guest a few years ago,
Love him.
and he said, from the Princess Bride, the character Inigo Montoya, right? He says, you know the line, right?
I don't.
No, everyone else knows. He says, I am Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Right.
And he says that everywhere Mandy goes, people ask him to do the line, to say the line, tell the line. But then he said on this stage, he said, yeah, but there's another line that comes later in the film after he takes revenge. And he says, he finally kills the six-fingered man. And he says, Juno, I have been in the revenge business so long that now that I've taken revenge, I don't know what to do with myself.
Well,
And
I get that.
and that sense of ambivalence, right?
Yeah.
But it might not change the fact that it still might be, morally justified. It may not produce the kind of sweetness that we assume, but it doesn't necessarily mean that in the end justice was done, and that's maybe a good thing. As you were talking, I had one memory, and I can't believe that hit me at this moment, and you're not going to believe that I know this, but you were in a play about this idea, right? I just realized this. Danny Sullivan, right? No.
Daniel Goldfarb.
Oh, Goldfarb, Daniel Goldfarb, the revisionist, right?
The Retribution.
Retributionist, all right.
I'm terrible with names too. I can't believe that I even remembered.
I just remembered, but I had everything wrong. But I had it wrong.
Yeah.
I remembered
Well,
it.
you had the
But I was the
theme right,
theme,
yeah.
right? No, but it was right.
Yeah, it's a revenge.
Just briefly,
the character that I played was, I relate to this because I'm Jewish, and she was a young Jewish girl. The play takes place in 1945, so it was 1946, so it was like right after the war, and there are a group of kids from Vilna that, Jewish kids that decide to take revenge on the Nazis, and even though the war is over, they start plotting these different ways.
to poison the water supply.
To poison the water supply. Well, my plan was to poison the bread that
bread.
was served to the prisoners, the Nazi prisoners that were now serving time. So,
Right. And there's this sense of moral irresolution.
yeah, the whole theme of the play is, it's fighting for, these kids lost their families and, watched their people just,
Right.
yeah. So it's, it was very personal to me, having the background, and a lot of my family members, having lived in St. Petersburg, were there during the blockade. So I certainly relate. But again, I think, I ultimately think, as an audience member, it's so, and as a writer, I don't know, I'm not a writer, but I just think those themes are important because I feel like on some level we all can relate, I think it starts in kindergarten,
Right. Right. That's what Mean Girls are about.
Yeah, exactly.
Michael, so tell us why. You've sold 60 million books. That's rounded off, I think, but close. Why are novels, thrillers, films, television shows about the legal system so compelling?
Yeah, I think it's a good framework. It has, an investigation. It takes place in a room. I think that works for it and works against it. But it is a framework where you can examine almost anything you want to examine in terms of being a storyteller, whether that's writing books or making a film. And I just, the stakes are high. There's a jury there. The jury is kind of like every man, every person. And I just think it gives almost of a voyeuristic look on something going on, and it draws us in.
Do you think there's something also about just the impulse to want to know distinctions between right and wrong? You know, that there's something about the, you know, if you think about both revenge films and law dramas, you know, even from the ancient Greeks, we have a long history of making art out of judgment.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think it's probably more a reinforcement of what we really already think. I mean, I think everybody has a sense of what's right and what's wrong, and maybe they go into these stories, again, in whatever form it is, to not really to find out what is right or wrong, but to find out what their feelings are about right and wrong are reinforced, that they're right, that they're accurate.
Your two best-known characters, one, the most best-known is Harry Bosch, who's a detective, and then there's Mickey Haller, who's a lawyer. So you're alternating between lawyers and detectives. The TV show Law & Order figured out that a formula to say the first half will be about the detectives and the second half will be about the lawyers. You're doing it differently, but that's not the way other legal thriller writers. You're back and forth, and Harry, I read somewhere that Harry is really, I read something that was a really great quote, that you said that all the other characters are in there in order for the readers to get a better picture of who Harry Bosch is, that you're leveraging all the other stories, but in the end, what you really want is a more fuller picture of this other character. And so I guess one question is, you are preferring detectives over lawyers in terms of narrative storytelling.
Well, I mean, I think, I mean, most of what you said there is right. I mean, it's everybody who does this probably changes over time. I think Harry Bosch is the character I'm most interested in, and I did start different characters and bring them in, or walking through Harry Bosch stories so you can see another angle on Harry. So yeah, I think that character, you know, at the end of the day, that will be the character that stands for whatever I've done. But you know, you can come up with a character and be very much attracted to wanting to pursue stuff about them. I don't think Harry Bosch is actually my most popular character. I think it is probably thanks to Matthew McConaughey that it's Mickey Haller.
But without the film, that wouldn't have been true, right?
Probably not, just because there's many more Harry Bosch books. But you know, in the last 10 years, I've probably written as many Mickey Haller as Harry Bosch books. I think the Haller books do better. And then from the standpoint of telling stories, I always come back to a character if I feel there's unfinished business, and I feel there's more unfinished business with Mickey for some reason, because I think he's more in that moral gray area. You know, Harry Bosch carries a badge. He's finding murderers. I mean, it's very clear what side of the world he's on. Mickey is more in the middle of the compass, and that makes him more interesting, I think.
Marguerite, I don't know if you spoke to anybody to prepare for your role, right? I mean, I don't know if you had to speak to prostitutes in this case. I know that we know that the idea that McConaughey wanted to talk to lawyers. I don't know if you had the same impulse. I need to talk to prostitutes. but I do think that you have this. It's a very tough role, because we know in life that women who are victimized sexually, that, I mean, is one of the reasons why women don't come forward. I mean, this is a horrible system for what happens to women who are victimized, especially if there's any allegation of rape. The woman's sexual history becomes the central issue. It somehow finds its way in. Consent always seems the complicated question that no one can figure out. This was so interesting the way Michael wrote it, because you have someone who's actually soliciting, right? And then there is a question, doesn't she still deserve justice, right? That nobody deserves what happened. So in thinking about the role, what were you thinking about? Because you do a really wonderful job during the cross-examination, you do a wonderful job of the helplessness, the vulnerability of, this is so wrong that I'm now on trial. How is this possible?
Yeah, I mean, even the courtroom scene was really interesting to shoot, because there's a very fine line, you know, for me. I was initially very drawn to the role because I am drawn to characters that have one facet that the world sees, but, you know, their insides are completely different, you know, and they're sort of justified. You know, it's like, yeah, you read many of those parts where it's like prostitute, stripper, and people have a visual and they think it's someone who's maybe not very intelligent or doesn't have a lot of positive attributes, doesn't have a lot to give to the world. And so for me, I like to find the insides of that person. And the courtroom scene was interesting to shoot because, yeah, I mean, in this situation, you're absolutely right. I feel like it's, you know, the justice system is brutal, you know, with the sex workers, because I did watch a lot of videos and some interviews, and, you know, a lot of these women, again, there's a stereotype. And so obviously if they're involved in a situation like that, you know, people say, well, you asked for it. I mean, like,
It's your
what do you expect? Like, this is what you do for a living, so big deal. Like, someone grabbed you or, you know, was inappropriate with you. And so for her to actually take the stand to speak up and say, like, I was wronged, you know, and that scene was interesting because the mix of vulnerability and, you know, and wanting to get justice for what happened to her, but at the same time, you know, she is a tough character. You know, the life that she lives, she has to constantly fight for herself. So it's like the mix of emotion. I remember when I first read the scene, and I still, like, even thinking about it, I get very emotional. And Brad Furman, our director, kept saying to me, because sometimes I was just like bawling my eyes out, and he's like, no, she wouldn't show that much, you know, she lives in a different world, you know. But yeah, I love Reggie Campo's character.
But Michael, many people don't know this about you. You started out, among other things, before you started writing fiction, you were a crime reporter, first in Florida and then in LA for a number of years, and an award-winning one, actually. Is this I mean, one of the what people always say about your books is they feel really real. The people that are on the streets know that these are real, textured people. Is it likely that this would have happened with Reggie, that she would have, given what kind of work that she did, that she would have been either a compelling witness, would have wanted to testify? I mean, what do we know about women on the street? This is a high-class prostitute in this instance. What happens in situations? I mean, we hear when, you know, it's a streetwalker, no one cares. Is there some more sympathy because Margarita looks like Margarita, and she dressed differently, she just seemed like a girl at a club, and that we could for a moment just forget that she was also a high-class prostitute? Does that give us more, do we root for that character? Would the jury have seen her differently than they would have seen someone on the street when you wrote this that way?
I think so. I think the movie really does accurately portray what was in the book. You know, there's other levels of this kind of life. There's another client in the film, Gloria, who's more like on the downside of that kind of work. She's near the end of the line, I think, and you know, they used a very attractive actress for that as well.
Right.
But you know, I don't know whether there was some kind of fixation on mine or not. But in the book, at least, Mickey. Mostly because of one of the lawyers I you know, researched this book with and spent a lot of time, represented lots of prostitutes. And so I was a fly on the wall in his office, and I met several of them, talked to several of them. And
they would have come forward, they would have cooperated, they would have said, look, you know, it's going to be so embarrassing for me. It's going to be awful.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to say, what do you do for a living? What does your 1040 say?
Well, I mean, I think that's part of the prosecutor's job, and also there is the dimension that Haller is probing at in the trial, that she has an ulterior motive to seek financial gain from that, and that was definitely in the book. But you also got to think in this person's heart, no matter what she did, she has really had an experience with someone that's really evil, that really had some kind of, you know, something going on inside, and something about her wanted to put that to a stop. If she didn't testify, they wouldn't prosecute against this guy. So you know, you got to give her credit for that. I also I was really happy, and you know, when I had when I wrote my 9-page critique way back 5 years before they made the film, I remember the script didn't have that aspect where the prosecutor says anyone can become a crime. It doesn't matter what we think about what she does, anyone can become a crime, and that was one of the points, become a victim of crime. Right. And that was one of the points that I thought was initially missing.
What about Margarita, the idea, we all saw it and Michael reminded us of it, that two things can be going on at the same time. She can target him, see him as a client, see him for a certain what's possible with him, and at the same time she can also be a victim. You know, we live in a black and white world. You say, I look at films, I'm interested in complexity, right? You're saying, that was what you said. It was like, maybe not, most people that watch art don't, right? But in this case, Reggie is both.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's, I don't know, at least in my experience, and I mean, it's also why I was drawn to the character. I just think I do think it's very human to embody both. Again, at least this is for me, but to be able to see both sides of the coin, to be able to see both sides of experience, to feel conflicted. I mean, someone said to me recently, you know, in order for something to be, especially something in the arts or creative, to be successful, it's gotta embody the opposites, you know? And so I think, yeah, that's what drew me to it, because as you said, you know, a character like that, someone can say like, well, you seek this guy out, you wanted to get paid, this is what you do for a living, but she didn't ask to almost get killed and to get raped, and you know, and I think in some ways, or at least for me playing her, those two were not even related. You know, like, this is what I do for my job, but this is how you're treating me as a human being, and that's wrong, you know?
Both things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
The film, not unsurprisingly, has a happy ending, because that's how Americans do it. That's how we roll in America. Europeans are very comfortable with ambivalent endings, you know, with not so good endings, with endings like, it can't be that. Americans can't tolerate that. You know this because it's your job to present these stories, and you know, to a large degree, you also know that there's sequels for you because your character's kicked to live again. But are you troubled? Could you end a book? I mean, this has a happy ending. Why do we need them? Why can't we tolerate, you know, the legal system, when people leave, and I can, you know, this is part of my own writing, people hate the legal system. No one has a good experience. It's rare. People hate the juries, they hate the judges, they hate their lawyers. No one ever goes home and goes, that was so satisfying. I was so impressed with everyone who was there, and everyone was very nice to me, and I feel that justice was done. No one says that. Everyone throws up their hands and says, I can't believe what just happened. And yet we don't tolerate this in art. We want the closure of satisfaction, the resolution that doesn't come in life when it comes to art. We do, and I'm wondering why you're both artists. Why is that so important? Why can't we just live with it?
But that's interesting you say that, because actually watching the film just now, I didn't, yes, I mean, and tell me if I'm wrong, I think it's a happy ending in a sense that justice was served in this case, but as far as Matthew McConaughey's character, like, I didn't feel like that was tied with a bow and that's a happy ending. Like, if anything, you know, at the end, going back to work for these guys, like, I felt like, oh, there he is back in this contradictory place of like, I want to be the good guy, but I'm still dealing with the bad guys, and this is my path that I can't get out of. I mean, right?
Wasn't that just a kick-ass answer? That was great. I love that.
I mean, I guess I like the European
Don't you love
way.
that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the best line of the film is when Langford says, what side are you on?
Right, exactly.
Because you can't really tell what side of
And he says, Curly says this, you know, we hear this again, how do you sleep at night, right? This is the term of art. Right. How do you sleep at night? All you do is represent scum, right? And so Margarita's going, yeah, he's going back to do what he's going back.
Yeah, he's still stuck. And I mean, personally, you know, having come from Europe, like, I certainly am more drawn to the European sort of ambivalent, like, not ambivalent, ambiguous, darker, more, in my mind, realistic versions. And I am usually sort of turned off by the tendency of American film to really tie everything up with a bow. But one of the reasons I was drawn to this film is because I didn't think it did that, you know?
Yeah, and yet you have more I think when there's millions of dollars involved in making a film, I think the people that are putting that money in and have control are going to steer it towards a happier ending. I don't think the book ends happy, and the book is a little bit different. The last chapter is called Postcard from Cuba, Cuba being an acronym for Conduct on Becoming an Attorney, and Mickey is suspended.
And in the first book, we hear that he had already had troubles in the right. So this is an example of more ethical legal.
And I think the biggest switch in terms of the happiness of the ending is that he's riding in the back of that car in the film and he's saying Martinez is free. Well, in the book, Martinez was sent to prison. He was a small guy. He was raped. He contracted AIDS, and he died before Mickey got him out.
And we can't see that in a movie.
That. Yeah.
We wouldn't tolerate that in a movie.
Right.
We can tolerate that in a novel. We need to know Martinez is exonerated in order.
Well, Mickey gets him exonerated. He just doesn't live.
He doesn't live, right. We don't learn this other thing because then we can't digest our dessert when it's over, right? Well, it's interesting. That's why I thought her answer was so great, because it added a level of complexity when she says, I don't think this is a happy ending. Look what Mickey's life looks like. What is a happy? He's still, and that's another interesting thing about this character. We have the pinnacle. In fact, you and I did an event once together about Atticus Finch. I don't know if you remember that. But Atticus Finch is sort of the pinnacle of this. But one of the things that people say, I know I've taught this in my own classes, is there's something unrealistic about him. There's something too morally righteous, too good. And we have that depictions of lawyers, but we have the ones that are more, I think, textured, that are more appealing, like Frank Galvin in the Sidney Lumet film, The Verdict, where you see bruised, dented, divorced, alcoholic lawyers. That those guys, Mickey, there you go. He's divorced. He's still got he's sex with his wife occasionally. He's worried about his kids' nightmares. God knows if he can pay the bill. And why the hell is he in the back of a Lincoln? I mean, there's such irony with that too, right? Because Lincoln was a lawyer also, not just the car, but Lincoln was a lawyer, and he was known for a different kind of law. And Mickey is in the back seat of a Lincoln, practicing yet a different kind of law.
Well, I mean, that was just alliteration, Lincoln lawyer. I met.
This is an example of overthinking things.
The character was inspired by a real attorney in Los Angeles who worked out of the back of his car and used the client to drive him, but he actually had a Toyota. And,
that would have been a different movie.
That's a different movie. Even more low rent.
Yeah.
At least he's got the nice car. But I mean, do you? So obviously, you don't think that you have to tie every one of your stories up to make it as happy as Hollywood would have it ending.
No, I mean, I love the gray area and ambiguity to end stories in that. I was on a plane here today. I was working on a script where I got notes from someone and they wanted to tie stuff up, and I wrote back, why should we tie stuff up? Why? I mean, it doesn't get tied up in real life. Right. Isn't that what we're striving for, whether we're writing books or making films or a TV show? It's like a reflection of real life, and things are just never that neat. And so I always try to go towards that, the ambiguity in stories.
The other thing that the movie evokes, and so Margarita plays as Reggie, a high-class prostitute, but this is very much an example of the relationship between money and the legal system, right? She's at a higher level at her work, but the defendant here is not Mickey's usual client. All of a sudden, he's representing a higher class client, even more scummy, by the way, really more despicable, morally compromised. But that too raises an interesting question. First of all, it plays into the cynicism that there's two kinds of justice, right? There's the legal aid justice where you go to jail, and then there's the justice that comes from paying, $5.50 an hour, whatever, which I think is actually a reasonable fee. I know that's shocking, but I was thinking about, when I was watching it backstage with one of our associate producers, I mentioned, she said, that can't be, $5.50 an hour. I said, are you kidding? That's a discount. I mean, in this city, for a white-collar crime, like Ben Brafman has been a guest at the Forum several times. Ben is way over $1,000 an hour. So I'm just telling you, it's way over 1,000.
Well, Mickey's, it says on his business card, reasonable doubt for a reasonable fee.
But what about the cynicism that comes in thinking that the legal system is rigged and only rich people get just separate treatment? And this novel and story makes you think that, there's just too many lawyers involved here for something to go wrong.
Well, I think there's just too many real-life examples that is the case, that money skews the system. And money draws attention, money gets you, better attorneys, teams of attorneys, and things like that. What I wanted to do with this was have a defendant who comes from that money, so it would draw media, it would draw attention, and the prosecutors might not back down. They might not put it into that conveyor belt where things are just pled out over and over again. And but to have a guy from the trenches get this case, and it's a mystery as to why it's solved later on. But it was a clash of I think between a guy who's up on that upper level, where cases can be changed because of money, and a guy who's down in the lower level, and they kind of meet.
Right, and it's the contrast, right? There's the bikers, and then there's the real estate people, right? And you just know which are the better side. I'm wondering whether this is playing against type, whether it's easier to root. It seems to me it's not easy to root for the rich white guy, in a way. And I'm thinking about the classic movie 12 Angry Men, right? It helps that he's a Puerto Rican teenager, and that we see that his life is being held in the balance by 12 angry jurors who want to leave early. And we think he's got a legal aid lawyer, it's horrible, and you need Henry Fonda to walk us through this, because unless you have juror number, was it 8 or 4? 8, good call, look at that, give that guy a mug. Juror, I knew it was 8. 4 is E.G. Marshall, right? I think it is. You need juror number 8. You need Henry Fonda to take you through the evidence. This wouldn't have happened with a rich person. He would have had the lawyer be able to do this. From a storytelling standpoint, what's interesting about Revenge is it's the Hamptons.
Right. Well, I think it's always interesting when stories address perspective, and I think so much of life in general is about perspective. I mean, in even everyday life, like I walk into a bank with heels on and my hair down, it's a very different treatment of me walking in my sweatpants and like sneakers and my hair back.
And you're aware of it.
Super aware of it, So, and unfortunately, there are examples, like Michael said, in real life where in the legal system, that still holds up. And I like that the movie addresses that, and also addresses the fact that sometimes it takes a person outside of the system to really get justice with a person like that the system can't really go after because of whatever they're putting out, money, education, there's a perception that, well, if this person has money and is educated, then, they can't do something like that.
Right.
Like, obviously, he wouldn't cohort with prostitutes and lowlifes.
Well, right. When that actually is, I don't know how much you don't get into the heads of any of the jurors in the novel, right? The jurors they're not in this book. But that's why I asked earlier about the Reggie character, like how would they be more sympathetic knowing that she was a high-class prostitute as opposed to a low-rent, a streetwalker? Do we know anything about, as when your days of crime reporting, do you know whether jurors feel that way or whether lawyers know? I also know that lawyers very often tell their clients, in this case, Roulette, to say, look, I know you're a rich white guy, but just don't wear the best suit. Don't pick your best suit. You want to look as neutral and average as you possibly can. We don't really do that in the film, but there is some idea that this is really a murder. I mean, it's an earlier murder, a horrible assault, but it's a high-class assault. The very rich kid and a high-class prostitute. And who are you supposed to really believe in this situation? I mean, the idea of the cynicism of truth that doesn't seem like the legal system gets us the answer. We just hear conflicting testimony. She gets beat up in the stand on the cross-examination. Roulette is convincing in his, and it's very cynical. It makes us think that the legal system can't give us the truth.
Very cynical, I think, is a very accurate about what I was trying to say, and that just comes from mostly my days as a newspaper reporter and covering trials and seeing how things are manipulated, and seeing how whether that's from good attorney work or money or perceptions of the way people are viewed by jurors or not. I mean, and another part, I mean, maybe this is just laziness. I knew I was writing about a guy. When I write about Harry Bosch on page 1, I have the reader, because what's he doing? He's doing a very noble thing. He's trying to right a wrong in society. He's looking for a killer. He's trying to set that kind of disorder straight. And so on page 1, every reader's with him. Mickey Haller doesn't have readers on page 1, and mostly I introduce him in the books by him doing something very underhanded. In this movie, he's ripping off his client right off the bat with that video gimmick he did, And so my job as a storyteller is to find a way to start with this guy who you wouldn't want to have lunch with, and by the end of the book, you want to have lunch with him, and you want to, or the end of the movie, and you want to know about him. And so maybe it's creative laziness or whatever, but it's easier to make that transition, to bring people into that empathic connection to Mickey by surrounding him with other people like Roulet, who is the rich white guy who did it, and all that kind of stuff. And then of course you put him into a box, or as he says in the movie, a trick bag, and you watch how smart he is in terms of getting out of it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that, and this is for both of you obviously, do you think that crime makes for better thrillers than civil cases? The idea of an actual criminal act, you talked about this experience from your childhood in Russia. I don't need to know anything about it, but there's a difference between something that is, but there's betrayal, there's all kinds of different violations of humanity. And I wonder whether there's a reason why, Edgar Allan Poe there is a genre in this country in particular, and in your country, Raskolnikov, with Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, it's called Crime and Punishment.
Yep.
And it's dealt with the moral ambiguities and emotional complexity of Raskolnikov, but in the end, it's a crime. And I wonder whether you both think that crimes are just more interesting than other kinds of betrayals or other kinds of violence against people that are not actually criminal. They're just something else, that they result in civil damages but not actual crimes. We wouldn't have followed the O.J. Simpson case if there wasn't a double murder, if he had done something else that was, and by the way, the civil case that the Browns and the Goldmans had against him, in which they received, $35 million, nobody watched that on television.
Right.
Nobody cared about that one.
Well, I just think I think you can find drama in any of that. You just got to work at it. But I just think there are stakes involved in a criminal case that are higher and more intriguing. Stakes in terms of people losing their freedom. Stakes in terms of a very bad and violent person possibly being let loose again on society. Those are always more interesting and higher than ideas of like winning money or that.
Yeah, but Madoff is a good example of someone who is still could be on the loose, right? I mean, he could have continued to perpetrate the fraud, right? And I don't know if there's a Madoff movie in the works, but I'm wondering whether there's a thinking that that's just not as interesting as the.
But I think it can be made that way. I can't think of the show offhand, but the Glenn Close legal show.
Damages.
Yeah, Damages.
Yes,
It's
yes.
not always about crime and not always about violence and all that stuff. A lot of it is. I think there's great drama in the manipulation of the law and the working of the law, and
Whether it's criminal or civil.
strategy of the law.
Right.
I find that more fascinating in the Mickey Haller books than the actual criminal cases or the case itself.
see.
It's more how he works the law.
I see. Margarita, what do you think about criminal versus civil? Something about crime that
Yeah.
draws us in that's different?
I mean, I completely agree. I think so much of it is about stakes, and of course you could find drama in anything, and if you write it well and you portray it well, but and if you give the audience characters to invest in, I mean, you could watch a breakup movie and be so invested, but of course, I think it's a lot more dramatic to watch someone, let's say, maybe lose their dad, wrongly, and fight for that rather than watch someone, maybe have some money that they invested stolen, which again isn't, it's just a different kind of the severity
It's
of the
different
emotional impact.
and loss.
Even though emotional impact of loss at that time for the person could be just as dramatic, maybe depending on the relationship to it, but
that we take the loss of human beings through criminal actions much more seriously than we do the loss of money, perhaps.
yeah, I mean, a human life versus, I would
Breaches-
hope. I would hope.
Breaches
Yeah.
of contract and murder are on a scale of horribles
Yeah.
different.
Murder or,
Rape.
something like a rape or a violent act against someone, yeah, it just,
But I also think it's also more primal. It goes back to why revenge is so compelling, because it's crazy making. Nobody ever walks out of revenge movies. They will not go until they know that the person who deserves to get his due, that just desserts take
Yeah.
place. And I don't know if people are invested with the same primal energy for something that's purely material and is a different kind of a loss.
well, yeah, I think it connects to different, like, as you said, primal human feelings
Right.
that we all have.
What about the attorney-client privilege here? This is a big part of this novel, and it's a big part of the cynicism of the system. People can't believe that. I mean, this comes up. I know that David Kelly, who made The Practice and Boston Legal, very often dealt with questions of attorney-client privilege. I wrote a story about this years ago about legal dramas, and and really this idea of the privilege is something that is infuriating, that the truth is being withheld by the lawyers themselves because they have this ethical obligation to not reveal the confidences of their own clients, even if it's an impediment to doing the right thing.
So I don't know what your question is. I mean, I do
Well,
explore that,
yeah.
but I don't have the problem with it. I mean, I don't know, maybe because of...
You're saying you think it's a good thing?
Yeah, I think it's if you kind of believe, if you believe in the Constitution and you start with the basic thing that everyone, no matter what they're charged with, is entitled to a full and great defense, then you got to have rules like that. And, and of course, it can be manipulated as Louis Roulet does here. And I think, so I like to take an established thing like that and examine it and then show it being manipulated. And
So you're not actually critiquing it in the novel. You're not.
No.
You're not making a statement.
does it seem like I was?
No, not really. No, I'm just saying you're saying this is a legal technique. This is a procedural rule, and this is how it's done. Even though it must seem to those who didn't go to law school crazy that the truth is thwarted by the privilege.
Yeah.
So let's go back to this Atticus Finch versus Mickey Haller idea, because we mentioned it a moment ago, and I was interested in. Do you actually think that you can see? I mentioned this the other night at the film festival when we had Supreme Court Justice Breyer. The American Film Institute does their lists of the greatest movies of all top 100 romantic comedies, top 100 westerns, whatever, and then their top 100 movie heroes. Number 13 was Oskar Schindler. Number 3 was James Bond. Number 2 was Indiana Jones. And number 1 was Atticus Finch. And I mentioned that to Justice Breyer. I said, what do you think? And by the way, on the list is Superman and Batman. And everyone's on the list.
Where's
but
Mickey Haller?
what's that?
He didn't make it.
I don't know. It's a good question. That list may have come out before they made the movie, but it's a really good question. Where's Mickey? But it is interesting, right? Of all, you think Americans love action heroes, right? We insist on car chases and shootouts and loud noise. And nothing happens. You have a gauntish Gregory Peck, with glasses. And if you'd portrayed him correctly, he would be even thinner, and more uninteresting looking. And yet this is this archetypal, image of what we want our lawyers to be, as opposed to something that's more real, like Mickey, with the divorce and the kid and the soccer practices and the alcohol problems.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's because he's number one because of what he is as a lawyer. I think it's what he is as a character. And, you know, I read that book when I was 12, and it has a lot to do with why I'm sitting here, that I ended up writing these stories. And it was not because, I think, because he was a lawyer. It was because he was a character who was willing to risk everything he had to do the right thing. You know, his family, his reputation, everything, to do the right thing. And that is really an attractive thing, you know, when it comes to telling story, when it comes to setting how you want to be as a person. Would you be able to do that? Those are questions that are really gripping. And if you can incorporate that into a story and add in a divorce and add in too much drinking and some underhanded stuff, but I was very conscious of To Kill a Mockingbird when I wrote The Lincoln Lawyer, that I was going to write the story about a different kind of lawyer, but he's going to get in the same situation where he had to risk everything to do the right thing.
You came to America when, how old were you?
11.
So,
But To Kill a Mockingbird was one of my favorite books.
so it was translated into Russian?
No. Here, when I came here,
When
and I
you
think
first
I
came.
read it like in 8th grade, and like, I was like in ESL, like English second language. But yeah, I love that book.
Does the portraits of lawyer, I mean, I don't know, are you faithful to the Russian literature of your childhood, like Dostoevsky's books, or because he also wrote a number of, there's.
Yeah, I mean, certainly growing up, I mean, literature was such, we didn't have television, we had like 2 channels, and I was like reciting Yesenin and like Pushkin when I was like 5 years old, you know, but unfortunately I feel like a lot of that stopped at 11.
But Russians love literature. Do
Yeah.
you still see yourself as someone that, you know, it's still in your bones, stories on paper?
Absolutely. I mean, I love books, and that's why I love books. And my house is full of books that are actually in print, even though, you know,
Right.
traveling, I do get to read the iPad, but there's something about books, there's something about feeling the pages, like handling them, that is still very, I think it's like part of my DNA, I don't know.
I was hoping that you'd say that.
Okay.
All right, take some questions from our audience. I guess this is for you, Michael. If Mickey Haller had been elected LA DA, District Attorney of Los Angeles, what changes of reform, excuse me, would he make? And what, in your mind, should be reformed on either just in your own mind or what Mickey should think should be reformed?
Well, I mean, has a really long answer. That's a reference to one of the latter books where he ran unsuccessfully for DA. I just think one of the things I would, just to focus one narrow answer, is the intake system, about how cases are filed and what goes into the filing of them and how they're viewed, how they're classified. And there is especially in Los Angeles because it's so big, there is a kind of a conveyor belt type system there that if I was, I'm speaking for Mickey, but if I was the DA, that would be something that I would look at. I would also, I'll just throw in another thing because I know this from experience with friends in that office, that the politics within the office are a real cancer in that place, and that if you back the wrong person politically or do the wrong thing, you get sent out to the desert. I mean, Los Angeles County is really big. They have courthouses or courtrooms in prisons out in the desert, and if you make the wrong move, you can end up being the DA assigned to a courtroom in a prison.
Right. And I wonder if it's even worse than in other cities, but it's certainly what you're describing. I just love this question. Did someone put this in here for me or for you guys? Do you think that the American public still believes, this is for both of you, that it is better that 10 guilty people go free than for one innocent person to go to prison? Do you actually think, this is something that just seems like a hallmark of American justice. No one ever questions this idea, that the ratio should be 10 to 1, that we should put 10, it's better for 10, let's say, violent criminals to be 10 to 1, not 2 to 1, not 3 to 1, not 4, 10 to 1. It's better for 10 violent people to go free than it would be for one innocent person to be prosecuted and punished. And, it's a very, it's to this, forget law schools, just where people naturally believe this. And it's very rare for someone to say, no, I don't think 10 to 1. I think both things are morally despicable. Innocent people should not be punished. But 10 guilty people should be let free.
I always thought the saying was 100 to 1.
Yeah. In fact, I think I've heard it said that way too, which even is 100 to 1.
I don't know. I come down on the side that the answer is yes. Just the idea that if there's one, and we all know there are innocent people, but in theory, if you know that there's one innocent person for every 10, for every 100, then the system is completely broken, I think. And so what I'm saying is the system is broken because we know there are innocent people in prison. But yeah, I don't know. And I know you can extrapolate what 9 or 10 violent people will go out and do, but I think about the one innocent person in jail, in prison, and that is hard for me.
It's unimaginable.
To take. Yeah.
Margarita, what do you think? 10 to 1.
First of all, I have to be honest, I didn't even know about the statistic. I mean, and I don't, even though I studied a lot of criminology and stuff in college, and I was thinking about going into law, but I haven't really given it that much thought. I mean,
because in some ways it's not even a legal question, it's like a moral question.
Yeah, it's
right?
such a moral question, and I mean, I tend to be torn on a lot of these moral issues, as I said, the one with...
Well, Michael's saying the thought of an innocent person being punished is so horrifying.
To me, both are horrifying. The thought of an innocent person being locked up for a crime they did not commit is horrifying, but also the thought of 10 guilty people going out into the streets free, God forbid, doing who knows what, maybe going after the people that try to put them there in the first place, So that to me is just as horrifying. So for me personally, in this moment, I think it would be difficult to say whether...
I don't want to drive you both nuts, but this is from another question that came in yesterday's discussion. Yesterday we did Zero Dark 30, and we talked to former U.S. Attorney General Michael Mukasey and former New York City Police Commissioner Ray Kelly, and I told the story about the film festival a number of years ago when Sidney Lumet, the great Sidney Lumet, the film director who did 12 Angry Men and Prince of the City and Dog Day Afternoon and Serpico and The Verdict, made lots of great law movies, was a guest here at the Forum. This was a few years before he died. And I said he made a movie about terrorism. It was about an interrogation session. And I asked him, I said, well, and he's an old school lefty. And I said, what would you do if I told you that if you tortured somebody for an hour, you would get information that would save 3,000 people, right? If you're really opposed to torture, saying, well, I don't believe in torture. I said, well, what if I told you 3,000 people, 1 hour of torture would save 3,000 lives? And so he was, at the time, 83 years old. He's an old school lefty. He's made all these movies cynical about the law and the legal system. And we have them. You can see this wonderful video on our website where he goes, I gotta say, if I really knew, I would do it. I would torture. And it was really scary, to think that it was a real moral question. And in the end, he said, look, I would want to save 3,000 people. And these are hard questions.
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like they change with life because as you experience years, you experience things that sometimes put in question your definitive moral ideas about what you would do in a situation until you're faced with it,
Michael, we're going to take one last question, and this one is something I was going to ask anyway, and it just gives us a nice end, because it gives us an opportunity to talk about, you have a new novel coming out next month. It's The Burning Room. It's coming. It's a Harry Bosch book.
Right.
But here's this question, because I sort of know the answer to this, but you can tell the audience. Who would you like to see as an actor portray Harry Bosch in the movies? That's sort of already been resolved somewhat, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're making a TV show on Harry Bosch, and it's an actor named Titus Welliver, who I had a big hand in choosing, so I would choose him.
Is he familiar to us?
I think if you saw him,
And you picked
recognize
him. He was your guy.
Yeah, we were at casting, and I threw out his name because I had seen him in a TV show, where he had what I thought was the proper idea behind his eyes of what he was carrying.
Also, age, look, he had.
Yeah, I mean, well, the guy in the show is, I've been lucky. I've been able to write about Harry Bosch for 20 years, and he ages in real time. So the Harry Bosch I'm writing about in the book that comes out in a week is over 60. The guy we're making the TV show is 48, so it's a different, but...
And this is Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon Studios.
And so tell us how that works. We can see some of these, right?
Yeah, well, this week we're filming the 8th episode of 10, and they're streaming, so they'll drop them all in mid-February, all 10, so you can binge or watch whenever you want.
So if you're on Prime,
Yeah, you can watch. You can
you can actually watch all 10
Yeah,
at
yes.
some point. All right, well, I want to thank our friends and guests, Michael Connelly, Margarita Ladiva. Thank you all for attending the Forum Film Festival.